Day 1005 off the grid. Little bit overcast, but we're still making some good juice. I did tidy up the garden around here a little bit yesterday, as you can see. But anyway, the reason why we're here is this is a bit of a follow-on from the old Asus computer crapping out. As a consequence, I decided to plug the CD-ROM drive I was using with it into the other Asus computer, the radio station computer. But something very weird happened. When it was plugged in, the computer would not boot up. And I thought I'd fried it, but I unplugged the CD-ROM and then it booted up just fine. Once it booted up, I could plug in the CD-ROM and use the CD-ROM and burn CDs. It didn't take me very long to figure out what was happening there. Was the CD-ROM drive, being externally powered, was actually sending 5 volts back down the USB. It was a back feed, and that was entering the computer, which wasn't really protected from that, and it was just disrupting the whole boot up procedure. Like, it wouldn't let you use the power button to initialize the computer. So I thought a pretty easy solution would be to block that power, and I've decided to make up this lead here. So it's just a standard USB A male to USB B male connector, the sort you'd use to connect to a printer or a device like that. But what I've done is a little bit of butchery here, and I've peeled back the insulation, separated out the wires, and I've got the 5 volt wire and I've interrupted it with this diode. So the idea being, this lead can still send power from this end, but it can't backfeed from that end. Now, I may have been able for this application just to simply cut that wire and leave it at that, but I thought if this lead is ever used anywhere else, this could be handy. So yeah, a little solution there I thought I'd show you guys in case someone finds it useful. Now, I do recommend that you use a Schottky diode for this, because the voltage drop of a standard one could be too much and could upset some things on this end that want that power. Now, I'm pretty sure my CD-ROM drive doesn't, because it's got its own internal power supply, but I haven't used a Schottky because I didn't have one handy. And I did find one on a little solar garden light board, but I wasn't willing to pull it off because I may want to use that board as it is. So I just decided to put a standard 1N4007 rectifier diode on there. For my purposes, that'll work just fine. But if you do make up one of these, I'd recommend, if at all possible, to use a Schottky diode, or like a 1N5819, is it? Yeah, something like that. I mean, either way, this is a 1 amp rated diode, and it's going to handle any current that could go through the USB port very easily. So now I've just got to stitch this all back up, making sure that these wires here, particularly the green and the white wires, which are the data lines, are still properly shielded. That may upset things if they're not, and this will have to be insulated. There wasn't enough room to put a bit of sleeving on to slip over it, so I'm just going to have to make do with leaky tape. So there's the shielding remade. I just used a bit of common kitchen aluminium foil to make an extra piece of shielding to go on there, and I just bound it with a bit of this tin copper wire. I'm not going to solder that because I don't want the risk of the heat to upset the conductors inside, so I'll just put another layer of leaky tape over the centre bit just to hold it all together. Well, it's pretty well secure, but as extra insulation from these wires, and then I will contain this all in something or other. No, I don't have a macro, so I'm trying to do my best with this camera. So here's the finished mod. This is a technique I came up with when I made that special stereo splitted audio lead for our Cross Creek mission for the spring equinox. When you want to join something in the middle of a cable, well, you could slide some heat shrink over it maybe and melt that on, but the problem was I didn't have any heat shrink that was big enough to go over the already terminated ends. So what you do is you take a piece of, in this case it's a piece of 9mm standard garden hose, 9mm is not really standard, is it? But it's a garden hose. But what I usually would use for smaller cables is a piece of sheathing that I've stripped off a power cable. You slit it down, put it over your work, then you heat up your hot melt glue gun really hot and you spread it open with your fingers and squeeze as much glue into there as you care to, and then let it close and just encourage it to close back up in its natural way that it will. And that's it basically. Once this is fully cooled down, I'll trim off this excess blot of glue that's on the top here with a craft knife, and it comes up with a pretty pro, if that's the word, looking lump in your cable, you know. But it means that it's solid so that any mods you've done there are going to be protected. Of course, a final DC check before I plug it into the computer, just in case the hot melt glue's melted anything inside in a bad way, but that's unlikely. So there we have it. Hopefully this lead will allow me some trouble-free CD-ROM burning. And here it is, completely complete. I could have stuffed a little bit more glue in these ends, but they're solid enough, so I'm not going to bother. This is not really a weatherproof intention here, but it would be pretty weatherproof if you wanted it to be, such a joint. Really good way to improvise, essentially a glue shrink kind of job when you don't have the materials, and I never seem to have the materials, so it's kind of fun to improvise. I drew a little diode symbol on there so that we know what's going on. So all that remains is to take it and test it out. Sorry about the light levels here, people. We are now in the house truck, the studio essentially, and this is the moment of truth, and I'm doing it for the first time on camera for maximum jinxation. So if it's going to work, it's going to really work. So mains on, CD-ROM boots up, hard drive boots up. No crazy lights present on the ASUS, which is a really good sign. That means that there's definitely no backfeeding, so that's the first part out of the way. The next thing is to see if the computer actually boots. And yes, it is. Now this computer has a flat CMOS battery, so I'm just going to have to set the date and the time. So we'll just pause it right here and get back to it to see if the CD-ROM drive actually works with the modified lead. Okay, computer is now booted up, and there's a bit more light in here because I've left the door open, but consequently we have that nasty noise from whatever going on out there, some construction or destruction or something. So there's something going on around here, like most places. But anyway, I've already checked to see if the drive's present because I want to see if the hard drive was there too. Yeah, and they are, but is it going to shuffle data? Well, I've got this Beltane CD here that I have to make a copy of because today a customer wants this. So let's load it into the deck. There it is, Beltane, instructions for light keepers. It is an audio CD, but that will still prove the point. Oh look, there we go. Open folder to view files. And of course we know that these aren't real files, they're fake files that Windows creates to allow you to access to a track. So let's access a track. Ooh, spinning up. Oh look, it's playing. How about that? Oh, this is that ambient noise track. Let's try another one, shall we? There we go. Song about Castle Point. It's just the shitty laptop speakers, of course, so the audio is pretty diabolical, but that's beside the point. No YouTube copyright issues here because this is my own music. Oh, drive's going. There's our lead over there. So, I would consider that a pretty successful modification. Now, I could have just got on with just booting up the computer, then plugging in the CD-ROM, but this computer has its ports at the back of the machine, so that's extremely awkward, and at some point I'll probably want to use the CD-ROM with the Lenovo, and there's no way in hell I want to risk poking 5 volts as a backfeed back down into its ports, although chances are it's better protected. Now, why with my old setup, with the old Asus, there wasn't a problem? Well, maybe it just handled it better, or maybe because it was running through a hub, the hub kind of isolated it. In fact, I wouldn't mind betting that some of the 5 volts that this drive supplied was actually helping to feed other things plugged into the hub. Not really the orthodox way of doing it, so I'd rather just have things clean, and you know, if something's supposed to be powered by 5 volts, that's fine, but 5 volts should not come back down a USB port from the receiving end into the transmitting end. So that's all sorted on day 1005 off the grid.